Hi, folks, and welcome to a very special episode of Aches and Games. Over the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to be running through each of our favourite games of 2024. And don't forget, we'll also be back on Friday, the 3rd of January 2025 for the first episode of a new style Aches and Games Monthly, our monthly catch-up in terms of what we've been doing, playing, etc. That's going to continue to drop first Friday of every month, to be complemented by these episodes, which hopefully are a little bit more timeless. Joining me as always is my co-host and good friend James Hapes. James, I think we both enjoyed this topic last year. I'm looking forward to it. Do you want to run through what today's going to be all about?
Yes, why not? Like Giles says, a special episode, so hopefully it'll be useful all year round for anyone who wants to catch back up on it. Basically, this one, it was all about our games of the year. And in terms of games of the year, we're talking about the year 2024. So it does age it a little bit, but it is the year we've just been through anyway. But it's a bit different. So it's not just games that were released in 2024, it's games that we've played in 2024. So rather than the standard modern stuff, it could be some stuff we played that came out years and years ago, but we've just happened to play it this year. So we're going to do a basic top 5 for both of us. The exciting part is that it's a secret for both of us, so none of us know who the other person's top 5s are. So it could be 5 identical games, or it could be 10 completely different games. Who knows? That's what makes it so fascinating. And then after those bits, we're also going to then talk about a few honourable mentions that didn't make the top 5, but were really good, and a few other bits and pieces like games we've played most of the year, things we're looking forward to for next year. So lots of fun stuff, hopefully. Giles.
Yeah, no, sounds good. And I guess, because these are the more rapid-fire episodes, we could probably dive straight into our first choice. Who wants to go first? James, as you take a sip of drink. Do you want to go first? Yeah, as always.
Yeah. I just want before I start, just to say how smart you look, Giles. You're very nice in your waistcoat and tie.
Thank you very much. Well, likewise, yes. Listeners, check out our videos that we're bound to put up a couple of pictures, I'm sure, on socials. We decided to dress for the occasion. It is second annual Aches and Games Games of the Year, so obviously wanted to mark the occasion. And yes, we're dressed up looking like right pillows, but please, we'll do anything for clicks, basically.
Yeah, to celebrate our Games of the Year, we decided to dress up like snooker referees, so all good. I had some difficulties come out of my 5 top games of the year because there's so many good games we played this year, some of which have been our games of the month, some of which we've just played on the side, some of which we paid money for, but very few, and some of which have been on subscription services. So hopefully you recognise a few from the episodes over the past year, because some of them we've talked about at length already. But my first one is... Should have had a fake drum roll, shouldn't we? Plague Tale Requiem, because Plague Tale Requiem was a wonderful game. Probably didn't come out this year, probably came out last year or the year before potentially, but I played it a lot this year. According to my PlayStation end-of-year summary, which they sent me, it's one of my top games that I played this year, and it was awesome. For those of you who haven't played it, which is probably a few of you, it's a follow-up to Plague Tale. Plague Tale itself was the first one, and it was a little bit shorter and a bit less open-worldy. The second one was much longer, a bit more in-depth, lots more fighting and action in the second one, from what I understand, having never played the first one. And the second one was awesome. So, roughly speaking, it followed the story of... There's a boy called Hugo who has some kind of special disease called the macula, which means that he can come out in a really veiny face, and he can, when he's getting stressed, make rats appear and then eventually control rats so that they can kill people. So he's kind of chased around the country by people who would rather he wasn't alive, given that he can control rats and bring on the plague to the entire world, which makes sense when you look at it in that way. So in some ways, similar to The Last of Us, the protagonist, bigger sister, has a tough choice to make. She's trying to protect her little brother from all the baddies, even though in reality it'd probably make a lot more sense if she just let the kid be bumped off, because then the world wouldn't end, if that makes sense. So it's a great game, great graphics, really interesting narrative, voice acting's great, very big on adventure, but also very big on murdering of rats, which is quite exciting. So there's literally rats everywhere, but they don't like daylight, they don't like fires, so any kind of flames that you manage to pop out scares the rats away for a little bit. So there's lots of rat chasing, lots of adventure, lots of sort of stuff on boats, lots of travelling the globe trying to find a place where Hugo thinks he's going to be cured of his disease, but for those who play it to the end, it doesn't quite work out as planned for the whole family, and it leaves with a really tough choice towards the end of the game, which the protagonist's older sister has to make. Brilliant game, very much enjoyed it. I know you've played it before, Giles, and I think it's a pretty good example of a great game of the year.
Yeah, really good choice. Just apologies to our English teacher, Mr. Kavanagh, who I think you had as well, didn't you? You said there were rats everywhere, James. This was his
Literally.
pet hate. and along with that. So yeah, Mr. Kavanagh, if you're listening from either place, and we both apologise, I'm sure. Yeah, it was 2022. I was just looking it up while you were talking. So if you're watching on video, that was what I was doing. I wasn't just reading some random thing. So a couple of years ago, but great choice, James. Mine was something. Sorry, James, you were.
No, I was going to say. Mr. Kavanagh criticised us for saying there was something everywhere, but in Playtag Rec Room, the rats literally were everywhere, so he wouldn't have been able to complain about that one because the rats were kind of everywhere, kind of.
As he would say in a strong Irish accent, pointing at the sky. Were they there? Were they there? No. Apologies to anyone who is Irish.
Just anyone.
Potentially anyone offended by terrible accents. Yes. Right. Well, my game was also released many years ago. I think probably similar sort of timing, actually. My first game was Ratchet and Clank: A Rift Apart, which I wondered it might be somewhere in your five. But yeah, that was first real sort of good game I played this year, so I thought it was a good one to kick off on. It's an absolutely stunning game. It's like playing a sort of CGI family movie, but sort of interactive. You are Ratchet, and you are trying to sort of make your way through these interdimensional portals, trying to sort of I think trying to heal these rifts that have been created in space, trying to chase down a baddie, usual stuff. You're accompanied by Clank. You're also playing as Rivet, a new character in some of the sections. Another animal who I should have looked up what they are, but James, you might know with your encyclopedic knowledge. But otherwise, we'll just crack on. They're kind of like little kind of rodenty things, aren't they? Quite nice, quite cute. But not the sort of thing you should try and freestyle on a podcast. So we'll move on. But yeah, it was a really fun game. Sort of platformer shooter. Really quite impressive use of the technology on the new, or now not very new, next generation consoles, because you sort of jumped between realities through these rifts. And I had a blast, not a deliberate pun, but I just realised I'd just done one. And everything apart from there were some levels where you sort of went into this mainframe as a kind of spidery robot thing, which I thought were a bit of filler. Otherwise, the sort of main gameplay with shooting loads of sort of comical different weapons, lots of humour, and these quite nice little puzzle breaks as well with Clank trying to sort of make your way through these sort of puzzle levels. So really enjoyed it. About 10 hours, I think. Quite nice, quite sort of tightly edited, and sort of made good use of my time, valued my time in and out with a really fun experience. So that was my first game of the year.
Yeah, I agree. It was a good one. It was all action, wasn't it? There wasn't much downtime. It was very much go to one place and smash a load of people up, so it was pretty constant. And for people who listened to the episode where we talked about it at length, that was a game where I didn't realise how to change the weapon, so I was playing 2/3 of the game with just the basic blaster and forgot that you could actually change it around a bit, which made it a bit harder and probably meant I took a bit longer than Giles did. It's a great game, though. Really enjoyed it. And interestingly, it wasn't in my top 5. It was in my honourable mentions list. So
interesting.
Yeah, 2 unique games so far. So, yeah, happy days. Shall I do my next one, G? While you're supping away? Wonderful. So, my next one is, which we've talked about as well, Disco Elysium, because it's very, very different to any other type of game out there. And I won't show how much I enjoy it at first. I read the reviews and they're quite good, but everyone said it's a very different type of game than usual. Sort of limited in action. It's very much a story that you work through. So basically you are a detective in Revachol, which is a place, and unfortunately you had hit some bad times due to some mysterious incident in your life, potentially involving your wife. Who knows? So you kind of hit the bottle and hit the drugs quite hard, and you end up waking up in a hotel in a mysterious place with no one you know, and you've lost all your detective's uniform and equipment and car and badge and gun and warrant and everything else. It's all gone somewhere, and you can't quite work out where you are, who you are, or why you're there. So that's how the game starts, which is always a great premise for the start of a game, I think. So that sets it off nicely. And then you wander downstairs in the bar, you meet another detective who's been sent to work alongside you, probably to look after you and stop you from getting into all sorts of trouble. And you then spend a good few hours going through different adventures trying to solve this big crime, which involves the hanging of a very large man. So there's lots of union type stuff, lots of political type stuff. There's lots of really in-depth discussions about politics and race and everything else. So it's quite a fascinating game. Like I said, very limited in action. So if you enjoy doing lots of things and killing lots of stuff, then it's not the game for you. But if you enjoy story-driven narrative stuff that's really interesting, really different, you probably would enjoy it. Interestingly, we said before in our review that there's a kind of different system whereby you can pick up different skills in different areas. So you set your original personality, which enables you to be particularly good at certain types of things, but bad at others. And then throughout the game, you can adapt your style by putting on different items of clothing and reading different books and picking up different skill points to unlock different bits. And that makes different parts of the games easier or harder, depending on what you're wearing and what you're doing. So fascinating game, fascinating concept. I played it for 26 hours, I believe, according to my PlayStation end of year summary. And that was the whole game. The ending was a bit weird. For those who have played it, you'll appreciate it was a bit weird at the end. Didn't make a massive amount of sense. But then the whole game didn't make a massive amount of sense. You have to sort of suspend your disbelief throughout the entire game because it was all very weird and very odd. But really interesting. Nothing like I've ever played before. Happily recommend it to everyone, unless you really like shooting stuff, because there's not much shooting stuff. And again, Giles, one you've played as well.
Yeah, probably not fun for all the family, right? It's quite a sort of mature game in the sense of mature themes, lots of drugs, drink, murder, general swearing, grisliness, people being horrible. But apart from that, yeah, I was really fascinated by it. I played quite a lot of it. I played it on the Switch when I was traveling, and unfortunately, it's just one of those games that I haven't kind of got back to yet, but. Maybe in 2025 I'll sort of pick it up again. I was probably about 4 or 5 hours in, I think, and really I could see the appeal and enjoyed it. It's just a really deep, layered, interesting story, and like nothing I've played before either. So good choice.
Very dark. Like we said at the time, lots of our games we played this year have been very dark, and that was certainly very dark.
Yes, yeah. We do have some light, but my next one, in fact, most of my choices now are quite dark. Ratchet and Clank, that was a fun family option.
Yeah.
Next one literally was quite dark because it was our first game of the month. It was Animal Well. And this was, I was umming and ahhing about including this in my top 5. Again, James mentioned, we'll cover some honourable mentions. It bounced in and out of my 5 over the course of the last few weeks as I was thinking about it. But number 1, it was our first game of the month. And after Hannah suggested we do something else, I think we both played Ratchet and Clank early in the year and had enjoyed sort of comparing thoughts about it. And so she suggested that we pick a game each month, and we've done so ever since. Animal Well was our first, so it has some fond memories for me for that. But also, it was just a really good game. Very sort of retro style. So you could, I think you said in the episode when we talked about our thoughts that it was sort of almost something from the Spectrum days. You could imagine playing it on the Specky visually, and then it's got very cool atmospheric but very basic sort of soundtrack that's sort of echoey, cavernous kind of and slightly electronic sort of soundtrack going on in the background. Really filled in the blanks for a game that had literally no story. I think you just start in a cave, or presumably a well, with lots of animals around. So very, very clear what the title was about. And just the sort of game where you were given no kind of guidance. Initially, I thought, what the hell's going on? I then went through a proper bell curve of feeling like I'd got it and cracked all these things and these sort of little puzzles and secrets, and finding these things out by experimentation. Can I do this with this item? Oh yeah, I suddenly can. That feels pretty good and empowering. Unfortunately, the only reason it sort of wouldn't end up as my favourite game of the year is that I then went down the other side of that curve at the end when I really couldn't work out what to do, and then it got just frustrating. And I'm not really the sort of person who sort of picks up a guide and kind of makes my way through it. If I can't do it myself, I kind of tend to just move on to something else. So I never quite finished it, which was a shame, because up to what I understand is about sort of 80%, 90% of the way through the bulk of the content. It was really, really fun, and it was in very strong contention, but it just squeaked through. Squawk? I think we've had this before, haven't we? Yeah, it just squeaked through into my top five because yeah, really enjoyed those secrets, those sort of aha moments, and yeah, also nice memories for Game of the Month. James.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was quite satisfying. Again, very old and very different than everything else. So it's kind of an indie game that's very unique, which is nice. And we should always support indie developers because the games industry is very difficult to get a foothold in and to survive in at all. So the fact that they managed to pull that out of the bag was good. And like we said at the time, graphically awful, sound pretty poor, trailer non-existent. And Giles made a fascinating point at the time in the episode that it was the smallest game space on your hard drive, and the only thing that took up any space at all was the HD image on the loading screen. So yeah, fascinating.
Oh.
I remember.
We do listen to each other. It's amazing, listeners. You may also recall this conversation, and if you don't, as we always say, please go back, have a listen. It was a great episode.
It really was one of the best. So yeah, it wasn't in my top five either. So we're on all completely unique so far. So we've had 4 games and no matches at all, which is fascinating.
Will
continue that way?
Continue? Yeah, exactly.
But unlike Giles, I did go back to Animal Well and got quite a long way in it. But then I never quite finished it, so I still need to finish it at some stage. But I will finish it this year. It's the last thing I do. If it wasn't for you pesky kids, I would have finished it. Right, number 3. Nearly halfway through. How exciting. Which one shall I go for next? Shall I go for Dark, or Dark? Alan Wake. Alan Wake Remastered, in fact. So that was one of the first remastered games I played on the PS5. And I played it in the living room at the time because we were doing various stuff that meant I had it on a big screen in the living room with a PlayStation. Sat on the carpet and really loved it at the time. Again, really odd game in many ways. Still haven't played a sequel, so that's one I'm looking forward to for the coming year. But for this one, basically, you're a bloke called Alan Wake who's a writer, but you've had a period of writer's block, so your other half suggests you go away on holiday together, so you sort of get on a car ferry and go somewhere exciting, and you stay in a nice little cute log cabin next to some water, and then suddenly you hear some screaming in the night and you wander upstairs and your wife has vanished. And that is where the adventure begins. So you sort of spend a lot of time in the game looking for your wife, and you kind of never really find her, unfortunately. So it's a really interesting game. Again, you have some baddies that don't like the light. So one of your biggest weapons is the torch. So you can sort of burn them with your torch and make them run away by shining a torchlight. Which, if only it was like that in real life would be much simpler. But again, really interesting game. There's lots of TV screens around the game that you look at, and it gives you some memories back. Part of the game is you go around picking up scripts, pages from your manuscript for a book that you've never heard of and never written, but you know it's your own book, weirdly. And you kind of piece together these pages to try and work out the adventure you're already going on. So the pages tell you the adventure you're kind of in. So you're kind of in the story that you don't think you've written, but in reality you have actually written. So it's a lot about mental health. There's a lot about sort of psychotic breaks. It's a lot about trying to survive against evil stuff. And it's really, really fascinating. There's some really odd moments in it, and towards the end of the game, it gets really, really odd. But I like odd stuff, and I like dark stuff. So my kind of game, really interesting, really enjoyable. Great graphics in the remaster. Again, great storyline, and something that I played through start to finish in a few days because I was really into it and really loved it. So that was one of my top 5.
Yeah, it has really enjoyed it myself. It's one of the few games I've played start to finish twice. They announced something like that it was going to be leaving. It was on Game Pass, the original, and they announced that it was going to be delisted, I think, and so I spent real actual money to buy it, or I played it before it got delisted as a second time. That was the urgency, because it's quite a short game, and then I've actually spent real money to own it, and then they announced the remaster soon after that, and I should have probably waited for that because that would have been interesting to see it all sort of tidied up. Yeah. Good choice, James. And you mentioned the sequel. I think it's in the Christmas sales at the moment at time of recording. I've been hovering over that button to buy the sequel a few times, but I've resisted so far because obviously got a ridiculous number of games I should be playing first. Same with you by the sounds of it?
Yeah, far too many, 100 plus in the library that are all really good games that I really need to get around to playing. And I've got some new ones for Christmas as well, which we'll talk about later on at some stage.
Nice. Well, that is a good reminder why we're talking about games that we played this year rather than released this year, because I think both of us tend to be a bit behind the times, but we've got some current ones coming through.
Yeah.
And almost as a actual segue, one of the other games that got released this year that I played this year and made my top five was Still Wakes the Deep. So another of our games of the month. I've got to admit, I mean, I've been looking forward to this one for a long time, and so I think I chose it for July, August, sometime like that. Game of the month. So it is, maybe rudely referred to as a walking simulator. It's by the Chinese Room, a Brighton-based developer who did lots of other similar types of games, which I've suddenly gone blank on. Probably Dear Edith or Gone Home or something like that. Dear Edith? Dear Esther? Something like
Dear
that.
Esther, yeah.
Yeah.
The Diary of the Finch, you're getting the confusion.
Yeah, I mean, presumably the diary. Oh no, the diary wouldn't start Dear Edith unless she's writing to herself. It's all, I'm not a literary man.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to Still Wakes the Deep. This was set on an oil rig, I think was it in the 80s, sort of off the coast of Scotland. Very atmospheric. I loved that as a sort of film guy. Reminded me very much of Alien, the first one. Die Hard, there was some sort of crawling around in vents that made me feel very John McClaney, and just the sort of the details of the oil rig that you're on. Really made it feel like a place that I have no intention of ever wanting to go to an oil rig, even if the crazy stuff that proceeds to happen in Still Wakes the Deep were not to happen. I'd still not want to go there, but it's a sort of strangely beautiful place. It feels real. And it was, to me, I'm a big fan of that sort of game, especially sort of in between other sort of bigger, more actiony sorts of things. And this to me was almost the pinnacle of that sort of walking simulator style game, because it had a lot more interactivity than some. You were doing a lot of sort of climbing or sort of sneaking along ledges, that sort of thing, some running and jumping. There was a lot to keep you interested in terms of the story. I think the kind of fantastical element, shall we say, of the game, and the sort of hiding from the creatures or beings or whatever they were that sort of infested that oil rig. That was probably one of the weaker parts, I think, in terms of it got a bit repetitive after time. But yeah, just that mood. Again, another short and sweet, in and out. Good story, great characters, lots of swearing, which doesn't act as a plus for me, but certainly added to the authenticity. I'd imagine there's a fair bit of that goes on an oil rig. So I just really enjoyed it, and it was between that and one of my honourable mentions to make the top five, and actually went with this because it met my expectations, which were high, whereas the other one, which I'll talk about in our honourable mentions, came just a little bit short. So Still Wakes the Deep is my number three, or my third choice.
Like John said, a very good game. The atmosphere was the best part of it, and like you said, the repetitiveness of the spider-type monsters were the least exciting part, because every monster was pretty much the same, which is a bit dumb. But yeah, the Scottish accents and the acting and the narrative were all awesome and added to the atmosphericity. Yeah, whatever the word is. Yeah, so, great game, but my fourth choice is another dark one called Little Nightmares 2. It's the only game on my list of five that I haven't actually finished, so I'm still playing through this one. It's really exciting. It's between this and another quite dark game, which is quite similar, which we'll talk about in a bit in the honourable mentions section. I'm sure Giles knows which one it is, because we talked about it at length before. But Little Nightmares 2 is effectively, you're a small child in a world, and you're sort of going through almost black and white, isn't it? It's a very dark game. There's not much colour to it. It's quite grim and miserable. And you're sort of going, rather than going left and right, you're going in and out and up and down and backwards and forwards. So it's a bit more interesting as a sort of more than a side-scrolling platformer, like the other game that I didn't include in my top five list. So you get different hats throughout the game. You meet different children throughout the game who can help you out for bits of it. You also meet a lot of children who have sort of turned into having clay heads, and they attack you, give them the chance. And there's some really horrific moments in the game, and there's a horrific character in the school part of it. There's three main levels, number two being the school, and in the school there's a teacher sort of middle-aged female teacher who's got a very long neck. And annoyingly, when she spots you, her neck extends exponentially to chase after you through whatever corridor or hole or bit of vent you're in. And it's quite unnerving looking at her extending head. So you're whacking these clay-headed children around with your hammer or pipe, and then you're being chased by this incredibly long-necked teacher. So it's a bit disturbing. I don't know how it ends yet, and I might not want to know how it ends, depending on how it ends. But it's really dark, really disturbing, really interesting. The level of puzzles is good. You try and work out a lot of things as to how to get out of the room you're in into the next room. Sometimes it's through vents, sometimes through little hatches, sometimes it's through throwing stuff on the floor, picking up a brain and throwing it at a button, which I thought was quite fascinating in the level I played the other day, which I couldn't work out for a long time. So there's loads of really fascinating bits. It's good that the second person gets involved now and again, so you can sort of two-team some bits of it. But the whole game is just dark, miserable, and it's pretty much a nightmare of epic proportions. But I'm really enjoying it because I like the kind of thing and I like using my brain a little bit. So good fun. Again, one I know you've played a bit of before. I don't know if you finished it or not, but I think you probably did, knowing you.
Yeah, no, I did. I think I might have play tested that one actually, so I might have finished it in slightly odd play conditions. But yeah, it was like you said, perfect summary. And that, oh god, that long neck teacher woman will now come back into my nightmares. So thank you for reminding me about her. Not just to go back. I mean, we mentioned Mr. Kavanagh at our school. This long neck teacher woman who gives me nightmares wasn't one of our teachers. It was the lady that James was referring to in the game. But actually, now I think of it, we probably did have a couple. Anyway, moving on. I'm afraid we're going to keep the terror because my number 4 is the Dead Space remake, which might prove controversial, James. Because we certainly had some conversations about this when we chose this for Game of the Month for, I guess, October, spooky season. Dead Space, it's kind of Resident Evil style survival horror, but set on the Mashura. I've just suddenly realised again I haven't checked the names of these things before the episode, but on a spaceship, a mining ship, and things have all gone terribly wrong. It's fair to say. So you were the main character is a sort of engineer who's kind of come in to work out what the hell's going on. You can use mainly your sort of laser-based main weapon to sort of dismember these horrible xenomorph aliens that are sort of coming at you, usually jumping up from behind, sneaking up, or somehow sort of gurgling from around a corner. And it is genuinely terrifying. I had a few good jump scares during that game. During the first couple of hours, I certainly found it horrifically difficult and got quite annoyed with it and nearly didn't continue or drop down the difficulty, which would have been the sensible thing. So I obviously didn't do that. And then I persevered and actually realised that some of my difficulties were because I wasn't quite playing it right. I hadn't actually noticed some of the resources around the levels, which certainly made things a bit better once I picked up a few more health packs and stuff like that. But it was still bastard hard, basically, for the rest of the game. But it was one of those rare occasions for me, really, where I found the difficulty and the challenge sort of part of the fun. And apart from in those first few hours, and apart from the final boss, who I was not happy with, very nearly broke something in my house or my wrist, over the difficulty was kind of spot on and really gave me that sort of sense of achievement from playing those harder games. So yeah, Dead Space Remake, I think, could have done with an editor. I thought it was a bit longer than it should be. I know lots of people see longer games as more value for money. I think I've mentioned I quite like a shorter experience in and out, and Dead Space could have trimmed off a good few hours, actually, I think, and been all the better for it. But I really enjoyed it, and I wouldn't thought I said that after the first few hours when it was really doing my head in. So yeah, Dead Space is my 4th choice.
Yeah, really interesting. Again, a really good game. Again, graphically really good. All the modern technology involved, and the storyline was really good, and it's all really good. Quite gory in parts, quite interesting. But yeah, like Giles said, very difficult when you first start getting into it. So you can quite easily be put off after the first few hours of getting not very far at all. When you get into it, it's actually a really good game. Wasn't one of my choices, but again, we've gone for completely different games, which is really interesting.
Really
But I like
interesting,
it.
isn't it? Let's see
Yeah,
about our last choices.
fascinating. So my last choice was the one I found hardest to make because there's so many good games I've played this year of different types. But I realised that my first four, none of were our games in a month. So I thought I'd better pick one that was one of our games in a month. And again, a bit different than all the rest of the ones. A lot less, well, I would say a lot less dark, but it's dark in a different way. No, it's still actually quite dark, actually. So Call of Duty Black Ops 6 I went for because we played that quite
Ah,
recently. And I just love the campaign and it was really different than all the previous Call of Duty campaigns. It was very varied. We talked about it just last month, didn't we? So if you want to go back and listen to that one, we talk a lot more about it there. But basically, every different level of the campaign was completely different. So some were like desert-based traditional missions where you go out and blow up SAM's missile launcher sites. Others were a bit different. So it had a zombie level, kind of, where you went into this sort of facility and you shot people and they kind of crept up on you from behind if you weren't looking at them, and that was really interesting. Nothing like I've seen before in a game, although I know Giles relayed it back to something else he'd watched because it was very similar to another game or another film he'd watched. I'm sure I'll mention that in a
Doctor Who.
minute. Yeah, Doctor Who, that was it. Lovely. So that was fascinating. And then there was this whole weird bit later in the game where you're interrogating a character and you drugged her to separate her two parts of her psyche into different bits. So you had a good part and a sort of an evil part. And they were trying to battle against each other to tell you how to help you or not help you at all. And that was a really weird part that you kind of nip through her brain to look for different parts in her past to understand where her psyches have come from. And yeah, it's just really, really, really odd. But again, really interesting. It kept a good pace. It's always lively. There's always lots of action going on. Difficulty level was just about right. The story was fascinating. And yeah, I again got through that one in a few days, playing it straight through because I really enjoyed it. So we didn't have any other shoot 'em up type games in there, so I thought I'd go for that one because it's a bit different. And I thought it wasn't one that Giles was going to pick, so I thought I might as well stick it on there. Really interesting. And just going back, it was the Ishimura, the ship, wasn't it, in Dead Space?
That's the one. Yeah.
Yeah, lovely.
Memory's one of the first things to go, I'm told.
And we also played a bit of multiplayer in Black Ops 6 as well, which we've not done for a long time. So that was a fond memory from 2024 was being really bad at shooting zombies and getting our bums handed to us on the plate by our teammates.
Being bad together. Yeah, no, that was a good memory. And funnily enough, yeah, Call of Duty Black Ops was on my honourable mentions list, but it wasn't one of my top five. So we've actually gone for five completely different games, which,
fascinating.
like you said, really interesting. Well, my last game does have something in common with one of your choices because it's a game that I haven't finished yet. It's also a game of the month. Which makes for a fairly easy guess what it is, and a bit of a spoiler for our January episode because one of my top five is Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Now I'll go into more detail. We will do the sort of January episode fairly shortly after this run through. But for those of you listening in the future or just tuning in to our summary here, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle for me was, I mean, I'm a big Indiana Jones fan. Enjoyed the movies. It's funny actually watching them again with Hannah fairly recently. They maybe don't stand up quite as well as I thought they did. Even the original trilogy. I know, sacrilege. But that sort of kind of stupid sense of adventure, the comedy in it, in the films, is perfectly replicated, I think, in The Great Circle. You know, some fairly broad sort of slapstick when Indy's fighting one character and accidentally knocks out another one behind him, that sort of thing. That is mirrored very much in the game. But for me, it was just more about it's a real sort of proper globe-trotting adventure, and I've just been having an absolute blast. I understand probably about 3/4, if not a bit further through the game, and so I did wonder about whether it's fair to include in the top five, because you know, it's only right that we kind of play these things through. But I've just had so much fun with it. It's made me laugh. I've had some really sort of thrilling set pieces. The puzzles, I've really enjoyed some of the puzzles. It's not perfect, certainly, and I think there's a couple of things that they could improve on in what is almost an inevitable sequel now, because I think Lucasfilm are very happy with the performance. The makers have done really well. It's sold well. It's done good numbers on Game Pass. But it is a full-on Indiana Jones simulator. You know, first person was a bit of a bit of a gamble, I think, a bit of a controversial choice. I think it works personally. Open world sections, I think, are a bit mixed, if I'm honest. The Vatican was really good fun for me. I'm not so sure about the sort of area that follows that. But generally, again, getting into the weeds here, so generally, in terms of the game, it's just got that real sense of fun. It was perfect for December. I know they missed all the awards sort of season by releasing in December, but it was that sort of Christmas season, stupid, rip-roaring adventure, and I've had an absolute whale of a time with it. It's made me smile from ear to ear. So Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is my final choice.
Yeah, it's a proper blockbuster. Yeah, we're a fair way into it. Me and Sarah playing it through together, which is unusual for us, but very nice. It's that kind of game where it's fun to point each other in different directions and have a good time. It's a great game so far, but I've not played enough of it to qualify for Game of the Year for this year. But maybe it will for next year, because obviously I'll be finishing in January. I'll probably have forgotten about it by next December anyway, due to my onset of old age. But yeah, really good game so far, so not a bad choice at all. But it's fascinating to see that we've got 10 completely different games.
Yeah, weird, isn't it? Shall we cover honourable mentions just quickly? Anything from your list you wanted to talk about?
No, obviously I was going to say Ratchet and Clank, because that was nearly in my tops, but wasn't. I've got to say Fortnite, because me and Josh will play a load of Fortnite throughout the year, and I've mentioned before, it's a lot better than I thought it was. There's lots of different quest and challenges, and it constantly updates itself every couple of months into a new season, so the characters are always different, the weapons are different, the stories are different. Really enjoying it, and had a really good Winterfest package on there as well, with Snoop Santa, which is good fun. So yeah, been really enjoying Fortnite all through the year. Inside was the other game I was talking about earlier. It's similar in some ways to Little Nightmares 2. It's very dark and you're a small boy going around a bizarre place, doing bizarre things, but very much more of a side scroller, that one, rather than in, out, up and down. But again, great game, very much recommended. It's always nice and cheap as well. Then a couple of other little ones. Mad Games Tycoon, apparently, is a game I've spent most time playing ever. Because I played it through a couple of times. The Mad Games Tycoon, for those who don't know, you set up a computer company back in the 70s/80s to start off with the Apple and start off with basic machines, although with different names for copyright purposes. And you basically create your gaming empire. So you make computer games and you make consoles and everything else. So it's a kind of game you can just have in the background, do a few tweaks and have a great time with. So I really enjoyed that one. And bizarrely, Supermarket Simulator, which I talked about back in January, February time. It's a game where you run a supermarket, you stack shelves and buy products and sell stuff at the till. And although it's really, really low level in terms of brain intensity, it's actually really fun. So you can just play it after work, just to wind down a little bit from your day job and just to have a bit of a fun time playing with your shop. So those are my honourable mentions for the year that I've played probably most of. Yourself?
Excellent. Yeah, just a couple. So I mentioned Call of Duty Black Ops, echo what you say. In addition, Hellblade 2 was on there. That was the game that I chose Still Wakes the Deep over, which was a tricky one because I loved the first game, Hellblade, and in a way I think Hellblade 2 improves on it. I liked it more than quite a lot of reviewers, I think. But I think I didn't include it in the end in my top 5 just purely because I think my expectations were that it would really sort of step up from the previous game, and in a sense it kind of stepped sideways. Did some things better. It's a stunning game. It's probably the best looking game I've ever played, and the puzzles were fun, and the combat I thought was really interesting. What they did, it was just so different to the first game, but rather than improve on the first, they took some big swings, and I'm not sure they entirely worked. So Hellblade, just for me, was just slightly below where I was hoping it would be, and therefore Still Wakes the Deep was my choice. Otherwise, just group a couple: Golden Idol, The Curse of the Golden Idol, and Mario Wonder, 2 games that I've played with Hannah. Golden Idol we finished and was a really interesting puzzle game, which you're presented with these sort of scenes of someone having just recently died, and you've got to sort of explain away and solve how that happened. There's a sequel out actually. So the first one, Curse of the Golden Idol, I think, or yeah, Curse, I think. was sort of yoldy worldy, certainly going back centuries in terms of the tableau that you're presented with, whereas the new one is, I think, called Rise of the Golden Idol, which is set in the 1970s, which different graphical style and looks really fun. So Golden Idol, we really enjoy playing together, and Mario Wonder we are still playing, so can't really comment on that one. Two more quick ones. Dungeons of Hinterberg, I probably spent almost most time playing this year, and I really enjoyed it, but I think it didn't quite make the list. Go back to a previous episode for that. And Moss, I wanted to call out because it's something I'm playing on Quest VR at the moment. That one I felt that I hadn't played enough of to include in the list, but just the sense of wonder, sense of excitement, the freshness of playing something like that, great game, but in VR, was something that very nearly made my list too. So that was me. And James, you mentioned game most played ever was the Mad Games Tycoon. Does that mean that was your most played game of the year this year?
Hard to tell. So obviously I play across different platforms. So I know what my PlayStation most played game were, which was Disco Elysium at 27 hours, followed closely by FIFA 24 and Plague Tale Requiem, both 26 hours. But I played an awful lot of Fortnite this year because Joshua's been playing it. So obviously I've not tracked my time on Fortnite, but I was a load of time playing Fortnite. But yeah, on Steam you can also track how long you've spent on a game. But annoyingly with Steam, obviously with PC games, they kind of just play in the background, so you're not actively playing the game the whole time. So allegedly I spent 120 hours playing Supermarket Simulator, which seems like an awful lot of time considering how easy the game is. So I can't imagine I was engaged in it the whole time, but physically it was technically on the whole time. And Mad Games Tycoon 2, 127 hours, but that wasn't all this year because I played it 2 years ago and again this year, so probably 60 hours both times around. So your guess is as good as mine as to which game I play most often. One game I forgot to mention earlier as an honourable mention was Bramble, obviously, because Bramble was awesome.
Oh, yeah.
I spent loads of time talking about Bramble, didn't I, earlier in the year? It's a sort of a Nordic mythology type game, sort of Hansel and Gretel type, mysterious bits and pieces. Again, really dark. Again, there's a butchery part where you're being hacked at by a rat with a big carving knife. It's a fascinating game. Right. Again, I said at the time it was one of my favourite games, but it didn't quite make the top 5, and I forgot to write it down, but it's just popped into my head. So Bramble, awesome game if you ever get a chance to check it out. One.
Yes, when you were talking about Little Nightmares and you said there's another game, I was thinking of Bramble. And then, I think I might have played that this year. And again, it just didn't come to mind. So maybe that says something. Interesting. My most played, I think my most played game of the year was probably Hogwarts Legacy, which I really enjoyed, but didn't make the list. So I think that was one of those ones, to me, another example rather, of games that could be better shorter. So I played it through, I kept with it, but maybe if it was a few hours shorter, it might have actually maybe troubled my list. And then we had a couple of ideas just to finish off. Biggest gaming related surprise of the year. Let's go positive and negative. What surprised you this year, James?
Positive surprise is Animal Well, one of your top 5 games, because obviously it was an independent game that just popped out of nowhere and went directly onto a PlayStation basic level, I think, on day one release, which is quite unusual for the PlayStation. So that was nice because it just popped out on there. And yeah, really enjoyed it. It was very different, like we mentioned earlier. So that was a nice surprise. And a game that is kind of no graphically or musically better than it would have been in the 80s, still managed to capture our attention and interest in the 2020s when there's so many much better, in inverted commas, games out there. That one's still really interesting and very different. So I enjoyed that one. So that was my good surprise. And probably my bit disappointing surprise was Harold Halibut. That was one of our games of the month. It sounded awesome when they were talking about it in terms of the stop capture motion play type animation, and that should have been awesome. And in part it was, but the storyline was so slow and the movement was so slow and it just sort of dragged in parts and it wasn't quite as exciting as I expected it to be. I kind of built it up in my head and it wasn't as good as it should have been when it came out. So again, it was a good game. I enjoyed it and no regrets from finishing it. I got through and there's a nice ending and quite emotional, but it just wasn't as exciting as I was hoping it was going to be. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, you've actually convinced me on Harold Halibut. I'd forgotten about that. That was a shame. A bit mixed emotions because it had some really good things going for it,
Mm.
didn't it? Similarly for me, I mentioned Hellblade 2. It's very nearly in my top five, but I'd hyped myself up about that game and really thought it was going to be one for the ages. So that was a bit of a disappointment. Similarly, a game called Plucky Squire, The Plucky Squire, which came to PS Plus a few months ago. I really loved what I'd seen about that game, and yet what I had seen about that game. But the first few hours with it really were a bit of a grind for me. So I've bounced off that one. I'll talk about that a bit more in January's episode. And then, it sounds a bit sort of do-goodery, but I think the thing I had to highlight is the layoffs happening in the industry. It's been a really crappy year for anyone working in video games, or most people, even if they haven't been affected directly, will have seen team members lose their jobs, that sort of thing. And it is, it's an industry that expanded massively during the COVID times, and now is seeing huge numbers of layoffs, which is obviously really terrible for the people affected. But also, you get the sense that these are big corpos wanting to make more money. So, unfortunately, capitalism, boo. But yeah, biggest disappointment is probably the number of people who've lost their job this year.
Yeah, fair point.
Positive. I mean, it's hard to argue with, isn't it? Sorry to bring me down. Let me finish on some more positives from me. Biggest gaming related surprise for me is how much I am loving playing in VR, having found lots of things to kind of complain and moan about previously. So I'll talk a bit more about that over the coming months, no doubt. Please check out our monthly show for more of that. I bought a VR headset. I didn't think I ever would again. So that was my biggest surprise, and I'm loving it. And then we also said, let's finish on our most excited to play 2024 release, rather. I've written it down wrongly in my notes, which confused the hell out of me. But a game that came out this year that we're most excited to play. I'm going to jump in, James, and let you finish the episode if that's okay.
Cool.
For me, it's Astrobot. And we talk about Joy. It's won some awards. It looks great. I loved the VR game. That was really my best VR experience on PSVR, I think. And it just seems to have brought so much joy to so many people. Astrobot is definitely top of my list of things to pick up in a sale, or hopefully, if it were to come to a subscription, to play next year. How about you, James?
Yeah, I had Astrobot on my list as well, because it's all bound to be awesome. We also had the original Astrobot when the PS5 came out, and that made good use of the wonderful PS5 DualSense controller. It is called DualSense, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah, good. I got that wrong many
we
times.
We do this every time, yeah.
Could be something else. Oh, DualShock was there, wasn't it? Yeah, DualShock, DualSense, lovely. All dual. Apart from that, Silent Hill 2, I got that for Christmas from my father-in-law in real life, using real life money. So it's actually on a disc. I can put it into a hole and it does some stuff. So fascinating. Again, Silent Hill 2, I wanted to play for a little while because there was lots of build up to it. Obviously, it was a sort of a remaster of an old Silent Hill game from many, many years ago. The trailers looked really good for a while, and then the trailers looked really awful in terms of the graphics for a while. So we were sort of debating whether it was going to actually be any good when it came out. But since then, when it came out, the reviews have all been good. It was on the list for Game of the Year for lots of different games awards, and it looks really good as well. Obviously, very dark and atmospheric, and lots of bad stuff going on, which is my kind of game apparently, even though I'm quite a happy person in real life. No idea why. So I'll be whipping that one out in the new year, or once I unwrap it from the cellophane. So that was one big one. But also, looking at the Game of the Year stuff, which I'm sure we'll talk about again at some stage in the near future, there's a game called Metaphor ReFantasio, which is kind of a Japanese role-playing game type thing, sort of a fantasy type one. And I'd never really heard of it, to be honest, until I looked into the Game of the Year stuff, and it looks really good. The reviews have been really positive. It's got a fascinating story. So not the kind of thing, sort of JRPGs that I've got into before, but I'm quite keen on giving that one a go in the new year as well. And obviously that came out this year. Those are mine. Any others for you?
Fantastic. Yeah, too many to mention, and I haven't written any of them down, so I'm gonna wrap it up. Those are our top 5 of the year. If you agree, disagree, anything that you think we should get round to playing ourselves, please let us know. What were the things you played that you really enjoyed this year? Again, we'd love you to get in touch on @AchesandGames through our email address, which is achesandgamespod@gmail.com, Facebook page, all the usual stuff. And we hope you enjoyed this first special episode. We'll be back every first Friday of the month with our monthly catch-up, more regular episodes. And these special episodes will be roughly maybe sort of 4 to 6 a year, just when things sort of come up. We hope you join us for those. James, any last words of wisdom before we get out of here?
No, just to reassure you that we won't always be wearing a tie and a waistcoat for every episode, but we might do, depending on what the topic is. Yeah, we've only got one and it doesn't fit at all anymore, hence why you can only see the head and not the bottom half. So there we go. So yeah, I've enjoyed it. Always nice to look back every now and again. Always a strange time of year, coming up to New Year's, looking at how things have gone in the last year and working out what's going to happen next year. Lots of things you can't possibly predict based on the last few years, but hopefully it's going to be a good one for everyone. And hopefully another great year for new games coming out. And lots of good stuff to talk about on the monthly podcast. So, yeah, I've really enjoyed it. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
Wise words. Take care, everybody. See you
Cheers.
first Friday of the month. Bye.